Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. As ever, if you hit subscribe, we land in your feeds automatically. Joining me, Rob Harris from Sky News as ever, Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq Panja from The New York Times, and really only one place to begin the sports story that's rocked the entire world, got the world of sport talking. It's the only thing on it, everyone's agenda. I'm just trying to show you a blue card.
Good story broken by Ben Rumsby, our colleague at the Daily Telegraph. It's one that people haven't been particularly sort of angered by the idea of sin bins being trialled, but the blue card apparently that's a step too far.
Permission to speak, Rob. You just showed me that blue card. Can I participate?
About 9.5 minutes, I think, left still in the sin bin.
In the sin bin. I spoke up, not in favour of the colour blue for this card, but the idea of trialling a sin bin to get rid of cynical fouls and abusive behaviour, perhaps it's not the worst. Allow people to kind of chill out a bit and then come back. Why is the idea of a blue card angered people so much? Is it because of the colour?
It's change, isn't it? I mean, football seems to change so often, and this is yet another edition. That's certainly how I think, particularly some paper coverage has characterised it. We've only just come off the back of VAR being introduced, Premier League's admissions over, the fan experience being poor. So maybe it's this constant meddling.
I think that's part of it. But I do think it is the colour blue. I think if it had been an orange card, which has been talked about before, there wouldn't have been nearly such a sort of outcry about it. This was the blue straw that broke the camel's back.
I'll say something about the power of football, that it becomes such a global talking point. We don't talk about rugby law changes or cricket law changes. Something happens in football and it just gets everyone with an opinion.
The universality of the game is enormous, isn't it? Any of these debates, they really go around the world at breakneck speed.
You know, the number of times we've been to International Football Association board meetings, IFAB, thinking these are very niche. Not many people are caring about them, and now you've got IFAB being front page news in some places. It's not, and it is just a small group of people meeting. It's the FIFA representatives and the 4 UK home nations with the votes.
FIFA seem to be rowing back slightly on what they said in November. In November, Luigi Collina, the FIFA referees chairman, said the sin bin trials would be extended. He said bringing it to probably professional or even high professional football. But then after the blue cards came out, then FIFA sort of seemed to row back a bit on that, Rob. Is that correct?
The strange part of this is that sin bins are actually harder to implement at lower level grassroots football, because if you're sending someone off for 10 minutes, you've got to hope they just sort of stand there. At the professional level, you'd have a fourth official be able to sort of keep watching them. And we already know about issues in grassroots football in terms of some disorder that goes on as well. But as we should see with laws of the game changes, it should be applicable at any level and usable at any level of the game. Technically, if a grassroots league wanted to introduce VAR, they could do, I guess. They just have to apply and show they've got the equipment.
The world's biggest focus group happened within a few minutes of Rumbo's story being published, and someone panicked, I guess. So what does this mean, though, for the sin bin?
The trials have really been taking place in football. I mean, in my local football league has them in place now for dissent. So if somebody speaks to the referee in a sort of abusive manner, they get sent to the sin bin. And the same with junior football, that happens a lot. When my son was playing in the under-18 leagues a couple of years ago, they had it in there. Mouth off to the referee, then you're off the pitch for 10 minutes. And it has worked really, really well from that point of view. The question is bring it in for subjective things like cynical fouls. Is that a step too far?
Aggro, dissent, hostile exchanges, friction. That's not about sin bins. It's more the UEFA Congress in Paris, which, of course, is the big thing that's been taking place this week. Tariq, you were there, and in a few minutes we get to hear some of the absolute highlights of just what went on between you and the UEFA president, Aleksander Ceferin, in that press conference. But setting the scene, first of all, this was all the week of the statute changes, which sounds dull, but was about how Ceferin and others could potentially extend their terms beyond the envisaged 12-year limit. These reforms introduced after the wave of scandals across football in 2015. The statutes went to the Congress to be voted on. So, first of all, how much dissent was there in the end? The English FA only? Did anyone else show a red card?
Well,
No blue
the way
cards.
the way this worked, there was 2 votes. One for separating the statute changes out, so the members could vote on them one after the other, because there was lots of others in there together. Some really important ones, like more women on the executive committee. There was one to get rid of the age limit 70, and all sorts of other ones, including this one on term limit. So there was a first vote on that, and red cards to say no, green cards to say yes. And for the first one, there were 3 red cards to say, can we not block vote? And they came from Norway, England, and Iceland. And there was an abstention from Ukraine. The 3 no's, funny enough, all with FAs with women presidents, whether that's particular to this or not, I don't know. But then came the vote, because that was obviously rejected. And there was a bit of a mess, but from what I gather, just 1 red card. Mark Bullingham, the English FA chief executive, saying no to the statutes in total, but only because the FA were so vehemently opposed to the term limit changes that could allow, as we've been reading, we've said in these podcasts, to the the UEFA president Aleksander Ceferin to stay on for up to 15 years.
I was interested in the English FA being the sort of sole vice eventually in that thing, about whether this whole sort of decision you have to make about standing up for a point of principle, or what's the point if you expose yourself and isolate yourself and make yourself unpopular. It's an interesting decision that you have to make if you're in those positions of responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. But for the FA, there's a particularly pointed, because David Gill, the vice president, most experienced member on the UEFA Council at the moment, came out in a council meeting, and he clashed with Aleksander Ceferin in December over these term limits, saying they went against the spirit of the reforms that came in 2015, and that was all made very public. So that puts the FA in an even more difficult position, because if they didn't, they're basically hanging David Gill out to dry. So that was hanging on their mind. And in the hotel the night before, there were a lot of FAs. You could hear them talking about not being fully supportive of this term limit, thinking it's not a good idea. But a lot of the smaller ones, one of the smaller ones I heard saying, even though they're opposed to it, what do we have to gain by putting up a red card? And again, that speaks to power within these organisations, how it works.
Probably because very few people back home publicly would care about it. So why take a point of principle? They might see it as when there's no groundswell of demands to be doing so. Unlike in England, where obviously coverage had been building and there had been reporting on David Gill's concerns. And indeed, someone like the FA, knowing it's already out there, it could be held against them in future if perhaps they're not sort of following the regulations as they see it.
Yeah. I mean, that was visible also at the event itself. More media, as usual, from the kind of UK English-speaking countries than elsewhere, particularly on this issue.
That was also something brought up in the press conference. So should we get to that now? What happened with Aleksander Ceferin in that press conference? And he actually made a point about the media representation in there.
Now, just a suggestion for you, maybe since I see all the men here, you should think about gender equality as sports journalists as well. I don't see many articles about that, but it would be just a suggestion, but decision, of course, is yours. I'm happy that one of the ladies is Slovenian there.
Well, it is a valid point. It can be male-dominated, the rooms, can't it, at press conferences? But there he was, 3 men at the top table, and very much the UEFA Executive Committee is dominated by men, although they did pass a change, so they're now going to be 2 spots for women, aren't there, on the UEFA Exco? Yeah,
that's one of the changes, and one that is sorely needed. It reminded me, you guys were both there, of an IFAB press conference that Gianni Infantino held in London not so long ago. It felt similar to that, didn't it?
I remember an IFAB press conference, I think it was in Northern Ireland, when it was one of those where we'd had the programme of events, and very much, I think it did say it was for the wives, and it was assuming that the men were the ones in the meetings. That I did ask Gianni Infantino, I think, about that. And also they did a photo call where it was all men, apart from I think maybe a couple of women for IFAB. Although I did, in asking the question, point out us in the room were male dominated as well.
And he did. The one I was referring to was one more recently in London, where he made the exact same point that Aleksander Ceferin did, saying that there were not enough women in the room in the media, and pointed out, I think there was someone from one of the broadcasters who was he called out as the only woman in the room. So yeah, it's fair.
I do
for
think
them
it's a particular issue within sports news. Obviously, we've seen growing female representation on, say, live match coverage of football in particular. But sports news, I don't think as many people are necessarily fully aware of how it can be reported on and the various sort of access that you do get at these events. So maybe we have an education piece and all that to bring that through. But the press conference more widely. And then we got this announcement suddenly from Aleksander Ceferin about his own future plans.
I've decided, let's say around 6 months ago, that I'm not planning to run in 2027 anymore. The reason is that after some time, every organization needs fresh blood, but mainly because I was away from my family for 7 years now, and I will be away from them for 3 more till 27. My family knew it first, and then I told just some of my friends and colleagues. Some of the friends, after the famous Hamburg Executive Committee and the articles, were asking me why I do not disclose it immediately and stop all the inaccurate articles. I intentionally didn't want to disclose my thoughts before. First, I wanted to see the real face of some people, and I saw it. I saw good and bad parts. And, of course, I didn't want to influence the Congress. I wanted them to decide, not knowing what I'm telling you today, because that's an honest decision. I have to say that it was actually amusing to watch all this hysteria around and at the same time getting all the messages of support from my federations.
Aleksander Ceferin announcing, not at the Congress, but at the press conference, that actually he doesn't need this statute change anyway, because he'd be leaving in 2027.
Yeah, well, that was a prepared remarks, or at least notes he'd come in with. The night before, he seemed to suggest that you just wait for the press conference, something is coming. And it was, he read this statement out, which he used to settle some scores again, a bit like the Guardian interview the week before with the media, a bit saying, you didn't check properly, you didn't ask the questions. And then finally, he mentioned that he told people that, as you heard, that he decided 6 months ago. And then that last part, thinly veiled, not veiled at all, because very identifiable, that the person he was talking about was Zvonimir Boban, calling to question his morality, saying essentially that he told him 6 months ago. And then he took 3 questions, and then he left the press conference.
What he had to say about Zvonimir Boban.
Just one sentence about his pathetic cry about morality. He was one of the rare persons that knew that I'm not planning to run in 2027. The moment he got the info that I will disclose it after the Congress, he went out with his narcissistic letter. He could not wait, because after my disclosure, his whining would not make any sense anymore. Now think, whose personal aspirations are in question, and think whose morality is in question.
And fascinating, this sort of suggestion that he is saying that he told Boban, and then he still went ahead and resigned for what Boban said was because this point of principle over extending the term limits. It raises more questions than it answers in many ways.
What sort of questions does it raise?
Why would Boban resign if he knew that? Because the suggestion is that Boban wants to run for the UEFA president in 2027. So if he knew that he was going to have the road was going to be clear for him, why would he resign? I mean, it's an interesting one. Perhaps we need to get Boban on the pod to ask him in person.
Much about as a change candidate if you've not been there for the final years of the reign. It looks like you've made a clean break. What's the eligibility to be UEFA president? You've had to have an active football role. Is it for 2 of the previous 5 years?
I think that's right.
I was checking them.
Something that you'd have to be checked by. But
I was checking them, not for any personal ambition there, just to be clear.
Well, the other thing with the Boban thing is really interesting, because he's essentially accused Boban of misleading people with that statement. So both of them can't be correct here. And I guess hopefully one day we'll find out we might not. He's torched his career, leaving UEFA in that way for what? Like the logic, I can't follow the logic of why Zvonimir Boban would do that.
That thing about loyalty being something that the FAs realise perhaps is held against them. Do we think Boban will be seen as disloyal, or the FAs will just sort of go with the wind and, if enough back him, then they'll all just throw their support behind him and it'll all be forgotten? This act of dissent against Ceferin.
Yeah, I don't know. But then there's also this other issue. Like, if we just to get it broader a little bit for a second, why have we gone through all of this? This is a €5 billion organisation. This is an important company in a way, right? Plus all the other obligations it has to society and all the interests millions of people have in it. We've had that crazy executive committee meeting in Hamburg where David Gill was clearly fallen out with everyone as a result of bringing up this issue. We've had the headlines in the stories, including people who've had on-the-record interviews during this time to clear it up. It's just been creating so much bad blood that clearly didn't need to happen if the intention was always to announce that I'm not planning to run in 2027. Now, and you could see the impact. It sometimes felt very personal. David Gill, for example, if you look at the dais, and you guys are normally at these congresses, those raised daises where the excos sit. David Gill was in the fridge. He was in Siberia or Trondheim, whatever the equivalent of being somewhere really cold is.
Personally, who was he sitting next to, David Gill, at the top table?
That's a very good point. He was sat next to Zhukov, the man from Russia. Again, quite a uncomfortable place for David Gill to be sitting. And I think it was noted by many people where that happened. So a lot of this is optics, but it feels overly personal.
What's the order? How do they determine? Was it alphabetical order or something, or was it selected for him to be there?
It should be, and again, this is from my memory, where the senior vice presidents are near the centre, so from the president out on each side. And David Gill, was in Siberia, it seemed like.
It is an oddity that Russia's football teams are all banned by UEFA, but the federation itself, the Russian Football Union, still has a seat at UEFA congresses, still has a vote, and Russian officials can still sit on the UEFA executive committee. And as you pointed out, a Russian was elected. Was it to the governance committee?
Yes, to the UEFA's governance committee at this moment, which is, as far as committees go, probably doing some quite important, sensitive work right now, given what's happening in the world.
Yeah, that's an oddity, not just in football, actually. I mean, the IOC has that same approach to people working the administration of international sport. Just to go back to the whole Ceferin Boban thing, I mean, there could be nuance in this, which would sort of people could, for example, perhaps Boban was said, if he was told, I'm thinking of going in 2027. I'm thinking of it, then that's not enough perhaps for Boban. I'm thinking of it, but I'm going to have the rule change anyway. But then you could say could then argue that I did tell him that, but it's nuanced.
So we're passing this stuff again. $5 billion, very important organisation. We're kind of threading the needle when we need clarity. And if I was going to write a letter so scathing, I might have wanted to check. Did you say you are leaving or not leaving before I mean, that letter we took, you can listen to last week's pod to hear the contents was pretty, pretty strong stuff. But yeah.
Well, some people might just be saying, get on with running the game, get on with assuring the rest are okay, ensuring my team doesn't get some terrible decision against them.
Probably right. But guys, 3 years is a long time. We're at 2027. Like, it's not a resignation, is it? Plenty of time for people to change their minds. Plenty of time for officials in football to say, can you please stay? There could be a group of FAs that say, you're running this place so well, we really want you to stay.
In the way to the IC President Thomas Bach. at his IOC session last year in India, didn't we have some member from the floor indicating he should stay on beyond his term limit? So could you see a situation where it is portrayed in 2027 or in the build-up to there where Ceferin says, actually, I had intended to stand down, but then suddenly members ask, we need stability. This is not the time for disruption. We've gone through so much disruption through COVID, through the Super League. We need you to guide us through, particularly with this start of the Swiss model era and to fend off the Super League threat.
I think once you've actually come out and said something specifically, it's actually, even if people stand up and say that, I think that's quite difficult. I mean, Thomas Bach has never ruled out standing for another term, despite being asked about it. So I think once you have said that, it becomes quite difficult.
So there was a press conference, something you've been calling for some time for Aleksander Ceferin to do. And who did question one fall to? Tariq Panja.
This issue has been around since December. Questions were asked to the press office and directly to you. Specifically, did you want to stand? No, people did ask you, and it was just this moment now. Thank you for clarifying that. The answers we got back didn't clarify.
You never asked if I want to run. Never. Except, can I finish? Don't be nervous. Everything is fine.
Alex, I did ask you. You know I asked you because...
Yeah. In text message.
What other... You said contact you directly just there. We did. Mm-hmm. You didn't answer if you wanted to stay beyond...
That was a text message that... it's also my text message that we don't want to...
And then also to your press office about these intentions, whether your view has changed. They didn't answer the question, so...
But the question... none of your questions were about that.
About the term...
No,
sorry,
it was,
I don't want to use
could
the
you
press
explain the term limits? Could you explain the shirts that some
either way,
teams are wearing?
They were asked about your intentions. Yeah. These interviews were published as well.
I think it would be good to make it short and just ask the question.
Why did you not clarify this earlier? When the questions were asked by the media?
I explained that in my statement.
It was a lively exchange, Tariq.
It was. It's just because, I didn't expect that he was going to announce his plan to step down in 2027. The points he was raising, we don't get to see him that often in that setting, and he used quite a lot of his address to kind of launch a barb at the media for not being patient, for not asking questions, and I just wanted to set the record straight. There were people in that room, myself included, others who weren't in the room, who have been asking all of these questions, trying to get a straight answer. And that is what that exchange was. The idea that no one had asked is ridiculous.
And if only they're listening to Sport Unlocked, perhaps this was what you had to say just 2 weeks ago when discussing the statute changes.
But what we're saying is it doesn't apply to people elected after a certain time. I think it was July 2017. Now, that only affects 3 people. So why don't those 3 people just publicly say, we're doing this to clarify this, and we won't stay on beyond 12 years? Then all of this kind of goes away, but no one is doing that.
Back to the current pod now, and Tariq, back to that press conference and the chance you had to ask a question. Do you feel it was a waste of an opportunity? We can't imagine he would leave the room so quickly. He only took, how many more questions after that?
Well, look, there's nothing that can be said for that. The fact that this guy only stays for 3 questions speaks more of him than anything else, right? This was an opportunity after your annual congress to take questions and speak to the press. I mean, maybe he had to run off and tell his members that he's just decided to not stand in 2027, because some of the members have said, why didn't he tell us first? Why did he tell the media? And again, that's something that he might want to answer. But no, I felt, is it a waste of a question? I don't know. The point was that we've traveled to Paris. We've spent a lot of months working on these stories. This stuff is going out into the world as well. We just got to clarify the work we do isn't easy, Rob. And questions have been asked. Otherwise, you just let that stand there like that no one asked him. That's why he never said anything. he had been asked repeatedly, and I think it's important that point was made.
He was challenging the way you reported, the accuracy of reporting, and obviously got an interesting and lively exchange that we could play out and perhaps tells you something about the character and about the situation. But then sort of in retrospect, is there anything that you would have asked that might have got more of a story, a quote that could have gone into a story beyond the exchange on even a completely different issue?
I wasn't thinking about a different issue, but possibly more on the Boban thing. And also he had Theodoridis sat next to him, the Secretary General there. And he said he was one of the people he had told months before announcing the decision. We could have got into some of the colour around that. When did he tell Theo? What did Theo say in return? We could have got some of that.
I might have asked some robust questions in the past myself at news conferences. Martyn, would you have taken the same approach as Tariq? It wouldn't have got you a line to put in the paper if you'd been there and in that press conference, or would you wanted to have challenged on the principle?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think Tariq did right to sort of ask some challenging questions. I mean, that's what you're there for, isn't it?
Fighting fire with fire. If often the person you're questioning is responding in such a sort of forceful way, then the tone can match it. You wouldn't necessarily adopt the same approach with some other individuals who are sort of in positions of officialdom.
Yeah,
some more mild-mannered people, maybe.
Look, but the other thing here is that it's just clear that it's not personal. That's what always has to be made clear. It's not a personal thing it's the job we do and the job they do. Our job is to scrutinize these people in these positions of responsibility. It's weird that you even have to say this. It should be quite clear. But just if it isn't, that we are there to cover UEFA or football or any of these things, and you're going to cover it. And if you are in the highest position, you're going to have the occasional difficult questions, and you have the opportunity to answer it. And maybe more press conference appearances will help provide even more answers to what's happening.
Walking out did leave Theodoridis as the main official there as UEFA General Secretary to face questions, and something that we can get to later. It meant he actually faced one of the most challenging questions, which is over Israel's participation in world football, and led him having to sort of give an answer. I don't know, maybe committing to a position that hadn't been intended. Who knows? But something to discuss later on. But as for the Congress overall, also the speeches, Gianni Infantino was there. We've not even mentioned him. There was a contrast in the speeches. So Aleksander Ceferin used his to rail against the greed and almost preposterous plans of the A22 Super League plotters. Gianni Infantino on issues around racism. So what do we make of the two different uses of the platform of the Paris Congress to address the European audience?
Well, I mean, I think the sort of A22 Super League is UEFA's big issue, isn't it? Is their bugbear, their sort of A22 were sort of boosted by the European Court of Justice ruling in December. So I suppose this was UEFA's way of getting back at them, stating their position, and trying to sort of another attempt to kill it off once and for all.
Well, before those speeches, the first speech actually was from the French sports minister, Amélie Oudéa-Castéra, who is under a lot of pressure at home. So I'm not sure how much longer she's going to be the French education and sports minister. But she came in with a full-throated backing for the European pyramid model, said the Commission should toughen that, essentially trying to help UEFA to prevent Super League. So that was interesting. And she also took on the risk, or warned of the risk, of multi-club ownership. Just two places to the left of her was Nasser El Khalifi, the president of PSG, who is invested in multi-club. So that would be interesting as well to see how that unfolds.
You can see how then Gianni Infantino used his speech to sort of build up to the FIFA Congress in Bangkok in a few months' time, suggesting he wanted ideas, people to come forward with how to tackle racism. And I suppose he's got the impetus there, but it's such a vast area with different challenges at the grassroots and the professional game almost, and perhaps he seemed a bit focused at times on the professional game.
He did. He repeated this. First of all, repeated this idea that there should be a forfeit for repeat offenders, and then he called for this is the bit. It's quite ambiguous. He said in Bangkok before that they should all have talks and there'll be a resolution on racism. Well, I don't know what that is. Is that a collection of words? Because we've had a lot of words over the years, or is it something meaningful? I mean, I don't doubt his sincerity. He did come across as someone who really wants to do something, but I don't know what resolution means.
Well, no, exactly. I mean, there's been lots of things. FIFA had a anti-discrimination task force, which was abolished, I think, fairly soon, early on after John Infantino took over. Then a new body has been established with Vinicius Jr.
Has the Vinicius body actually met? Do we know? Is it just announced?
Yes. Well, certainly, if it has met, there's been no sort of press announcement about the findings or the outcome of that meeting. So, we wait to see. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what a resolution actually does, unless there's some sort of definitive plan or action, or I mean, what's the resolution? Racism is bad.
Yeah.
Well, he did say he wants every competition to follow anti-racism protocols, saying that they're not all following the same way of responding to incidents. There are the 3 steps that FIFA has about stadium warnings, game being stopped, players being taken off for a period. But I think even the Premier League don't follow that.
No, I mean, so is he saying that there could be action against leagues and FAs if again, this is us speculating here, isn't it? It's kind of let's just wait and see. But clearly, whatever is in place now isn't working or isn't enough because it's still very, very commonplace.
Importantly, though, that was the focus of the speech, I'd say, for Gianni Infantino, since it wasn't just because there was an incident necessarily the previous day. There have been in recent weeks, but keeping racism on the agenda, obviously pretty notable. So as we wrap up things from the UEFA Congress in Paris, talk will be who now perhaps is the next UEFA president. Of course, Gianni Infantino was UEFA General Secretary. No one could have imagined, say, in 2014 he'd ever become FIFA president. Any runners and riders? One name thrown into the mix, Nasser Al-Khelaifi, the Paris Saint-Germain president, who's head of the European Club Association, although having a club role wouldn't make him eligible currently to stand for UEFA president, although these things can always change.
Yeah, that would be incredible given the various issues that relate to Nasser Al-Khelaifi and his positions in European football. Don't forget, he's also the biggest buyer of European sports rights as chairman of beIN Sports. So you're going to have a UEFA president who potentially is buying his own rights. Have stranger things happen? I don't know, but until we have a candidate, you never know.
It'd be interesting to see if that if you don't represent a national association, if that's in the statutes of UEFA.
Well, plenty of time to change those statutes. They can be done, as we've seen. So in 3 years' time, who knows what they look like?
In terms of names, Aleksander Ceferin's name wasn't even sort of widely known until suddenly Michel Platini was brought down and he emerged as the candidate from Slovenia up against Michael van Praag from the Netherlands.
Yeah. Yes, the election in Athens was when we first encountered Aleksander Ceferin.
Maybe there's some ambitious people within FIFA who are trying to rise up, who might then spot an opportunity in UEFA. We often see various figures, perhaps in the administration, who might spot an opening.
In it to win it, Rob. You've got to be in it to win it.
Well, some other news also in Paris this week involving Nasser Al-Khelaifi. PSG announced they're leaving the Parc des Princes, the latest part of their battle with Paris authorities.
This has been ongoing for some time, isn't it? But do we know specifically where they're going yet?
No, I don't think that was announced yet. And I wonder if it's like planning to leave Parc des Princes or will leave Parc des Princes, whether this is a definitive move or whether things could change moving forward. That word planning to can do a lot of work.
Now to something else notable that came up in the news conference. Whether or not Israel, like Russia, should be banned from world football. This all follows a letter from the head of the Jordanian FA, Prince Ali, to FIFA and UEFA, in fact every FA around the world apparently, calling for Israel to be banned. Now, this is a letter from the West Asian football federations featuring various Middle Eastern FAs like the Saudis and the UAE. And they believe that the civilian deaths being caused in Gaza warrant Israel's exclusion from football, as happened to Russia after its invasion of Ukraine. But what we heard from UEFA General Secretary Theodoridis when he was asked about it was UEFA views the situations very differently, particularly in relation to how this is Israel's response to being attacked itself on October the 7th. This is what Theodoridis had to say when asked if they're even discussing banning Israel.
There was no such discussion or such intention from the UEFA administration. We're always in touch. There are two completely different situations between the two countries, because also don't forget the start of the war in Russia and Ukraine and the start of what is happening now, which is regrettable, of course, in the Middle East.
Theodoridis referencing how the different wars started in a different way. Obviously, the Israel-Hamas war starting after the October the 7th attacks on Israel. Prince Ali's letter referencing the many civilian deaths in Gaza. But when I'm sort of looking back on when FIFA banned Russia in 2022, I've never really found a very clear explanation why, beyond sort of special circumstances. And if they said why, it might be held against them for sort of future wars and conflicts.
No, that's a good point, actually. I suppose it's there was a lot of international pressure. I mean, it was such a sort of seismic event, that Russian invasion, wasn't it? It was almost like Germany invading Poland back in 1939. It seemed like such a huge thing, and that there was such a huge international response to it. It was much more of a sort of a much more black and white affair in a way than the Israel-Gaza war, because I think that's that had the initial attacks on Israel and then the response, and both of those have obviously drawn lots of condemnation. So I think that's probably the difference. But it's Prince Ali. This is a guy who was running for the FIFA presidency. No, he's calling for people to be banned.
Yeah, and also I guess the difference in a couple of differences is the combatants here. Ukraine and Russia are both in the same confederation as well. These two countries, and the reason that they were banned was not because of the war per se. It was more the other countries refusing to play against Russia within UEFA, so it risked the competition not being able to take place. So it wasn't punishing Russia for a war as such, as people might be thinking. It's like, how do we protect our competition if there are no teams to play against this one team, if I remember correctly. And Rob, Israel are 2 games away from making it to the Euros as well. They are in those playoffs and potentially qualifies for Germany 2024.
Could be playing Ukraine for a place at the Euros finals. They've never qualified for the Euros since they joined the UEFA qualifying officially in the 1990s. In fact, they won the Asian Cup in the past. Then they were effectively forced out of the AFC in the early 70s when other countries refused to play them. Then they had a period going around Oceania and Europe before gaining UEFA status. And looking back on this, in 1958 World Cup qualifying, all their Asian opposition refused to play them, and they nearly qualified for the finals without playing an opposition. So it was FIFA who made them play a game against Wales, and Wales ended up qualifying. And this week, in the 66th anniversary of the Munich air disaster, it was pointed out that the United assistant manager Jimmy Murphy would have been on that trip, but for the fact he had to manage Wales in this playoff against Israel for the World Cup.
Yeah, that was a fascinating little bit of history, wasn't it? This is going to be a very difficult one for football's authorities to deal with, and I think it's not going to be quickly or easily dealt with.
The Israeli FA boss telling me he wants FIFA to stay out of politics. Of course, FIFA did try to put itself into the peace process in 2022 by proclaiming how it secured access for fans from the Palestinian territories to go to the World Cup in Qatar. That is certainly one that is still waiting for FIFA response. Obviously, on Prince Ali's letter, it's not need to respond to the media. It's a need to respond to the West Asian Football Federation. They're going to have to commit their position on this. Obviously, it will be closely scrutinised.
Yeah, well, Gianni was also at the those talks, the Abraham Accords, that signalled a kind of peace and reciprocal identification between the UAE and Israel, which was a big moment for peace in the Gulf, wasn't it?
More uplifting football-wise, Jordan, as at the time of recording, preparing for their first ever Asian Cup final. They're playing Qatar. Of course, won the tournament in 2019, and some of the big names, Japan, South Korea, all knocked out. And there we have all West Asian Football Federations final.
It would be an incredible achievement if Jordan win the Asian Cup. I mean, the level of football quality is growing in the region. That would be stunning.
Busy in the world of football, but we don't just like to focus on football here. So a quick whiz through some of the other sports news talking points of the week. And, well, we started in Paris, and it's the Paris 2024 Olympics that continues to attract the focus of investigators. Now it's over the pay of the chief executive, Tony Estanguet.
Yeah, so this was a report published by the French news agency AFP that French financial crimes prosecutors are looking into the pay settlement for Tony Estanguet, how he is being paid and whether that complies with the law. Very little detail beyond that. And it's to do with those arrangements. Until then, Tony Estanguet carries on his work, for which he gets, I think, what is around 250,000 euros, which, when we're talking about presidents and people running these sports organizations earning, far more than that, to be in charge of the Olympics might not seem much, but that is the salary. And the story seems to suggest that a vehicle or an arrangement, so he could perhaps get a bit more than that. And they, of course, Rob, deny all the allegations against him, and presumably he does too.
Allegation being that his own company was used to build the organising committee to avoid the salary caps that are required on charities in France. The organisers are just saying they're astonished by the news because they're saying that all of his pay was approved by the board and the economic ministry officials as well. So, it's just the latest investigation facing these games. I mean, this week they actually announced what the medals are going to look like for the Olympics and Paralympics, and they're going to have a piece of the Eiffel Tower in them.
Yeah, metal from the Eiffel Tower. I asked what they're going to start chopping bits of it off and sticking it in the metal, and they said no. There's always spare parts that when they're retooling the Eiffel Tower, they take bits off and put more bits on. So a bit
so
like
it's not
you
like
get
it's been
older.
there.
Well, it's a bit like as you get older. You get a bit of a new knee and a new hip, and I think the Eiffel Tower has those, and the bits they remove, they keep, and those are going into the medals, which will get a lot of attention.
Are we going to notice the top chopped off then to make medals, and then a new top of the tower?
Just the 100-meter champion. Yeah, you're going to get that little crown at the top of it. But yeah, I mean, it does get headlines there, doesn't it? Eiffel Tower in the medals. You're going to get a lot of people kind of wanting to read that story, perhaps.
It creates a headline rather than just here's a medal design you don't really care about.
Yeah.
Some very interesting news just breaking as we're recording. The Premier League clubs have approved tougher new rules for these associated party deals. This is sponsorship deals with companies connected with the clubs or any player transfers between clubs in the same ownership group to ensure they are of fair market value. So there's new tougher rules. Only just got across the line, 12 votes to 6 with 2 abstained. So that's just achieved the 2/3 of the votes cast needed to get through. But hasn't pleased everybody, as you can imagine. And Manchester City, it is understood, warned the Premier League that they could legally challenge these new arbitration rules because they believe that they could be anti-competitive. The Premier League is understood to have told the clubs that they are confident they remain compatible with English law. But a sort of another issue around these associated party rules, which particularly affect sort of state-connected clubs, Manchester City, Newcastle United, for example.
Well, Saudi Arabia, not mentioned them this week, and what's been going on with US concern about the relationship potentially with Live Golf and the PGA Tour and getting into a deal with the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, and just who is advising them?
Yeah, so this is an investigation or inquiry that's been going on since the Live PGA story blew up some time ago. This is I guess a foreign affairs committee in the US Senate. And they've had a few hearings. They've had human rights groups in the past. They've had people from the world of sport. And this week, just past, they've had some of the world's biggest consultants. You're thinking McKinsey, Boston Consultancy Group, others being hauled in front of this committee to talk about their roles advising the Public Investment Fund, the Saudi fund that is going to hopefully, or it hopes to be, the joint venture partner of PIF and it is the owner of Live Golf.
Quite major. They'll be accused of violating federal disclosure regulations.
The incredible thing here is these companies saying they can't disclose the material that the Senate wants because they're being sued in Saudi Arabia, saying any disclosures would violate the terms of their contracts in Saudi and could be criminal. So leaving their executives in Saudi facing criminal action. So they have to be very careful. So the Senate committee chairman Blumenthal, he replied that this is a big deal because what you're saying is essentially you're allowing a foreign country to gag American corporations from disclosure in the United States. So it's bigger than this. It's bigger than golf. And then I was thinking, if these companies, they probably wouldn't want to disclose all of this stuff anyway. So it's potentially, it's probably quite helpful being sued in Saudi and being prevented from opening up the books.
I think this Senate hearing is fascinating, if only because it shows the extent to which the Saudi PIF will go to ensure that its dealings aren't revealed in the Senate hearings. They're refusing to appear as witnesses in person, and now they're effectively blocking their communications, public relations advisors from doing the same.
Investment firm telling the Financial Times we have made and continue to make significant efforts to facilitate the production of requested information from our advisors consistent with the laws of Saudi Arabia, which should be recognised like those of any other country. But you've got Richard Blumenthal, the chair of the permanent subcommittee of the investigation, a Democrat senator, saying, you say you are between a rock and a hard place. This is to these firms, but you have chosen sides. You've chosen the Saudi side, not the American side. Well,
strong words.
Yeah. Well, in America this week, it's all been about the build-up to the Super Bowl, but incredibly, not escape the politics. Some grand conspiracy being leaked to the Super Bowl involving Taylor Swift and Joe Biden's re-election.
Rob, this one I couldn't quite understand or quite follow properly. Can you try and unpack it for me? Because I'm trying to keep tabs with Taylor Swift's career and the relationship with the Travis Kelce, the Kansas City, is it tight end, and the links to the presidency, but I don't quite get it. What's happening?
As one place called it, it's an elaborate plot to try to endorse Biden around the Super Bowl, as Taylor Swift did around the 2020 election. So it's an attempt, the fact that if Swift's boyfriend is on the winning team, then that helps the Biden campaign, and the fact Taylor Swift's going to go from Tokyo, where she's got a concert, all the way to Vegas to see Travis Kelce in this Super Bowl matchup between the 49ers and the Chiefs.
Blimey. Yeah, well, I guess we've jumped the shark here with this. Not sure there's much more I could say there. Looking forward to a good game.
Well, it did even lead to Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, having to talk about it, saying that the conspiracies are all nonsense.
Well, there you go. That should be the last word then.
Perhaps the last word on the pod for this week. What a packed week it's been.
Yeah, action-packed, my goodness.
Trip to Trondheim for you as well, for Play the Game conference.
Yep, very, very, very pleased I invested in that warm coat I thought I'd never use. So, very interesting conference. And just want to say, Congratulations to Nick Harris, former Mail on Sunday journalist, who was given a Lifetime Achievement Award at that event at Play the Game for his work in investigative journalism. So well done, Nick.
Yeah, congratulations, Nick. A lifetime achievement, but still very much reporting.
Yeah, still more to do, more to fill his reporter's notebook with. Perhaps more awards in the future as well.
And listening to this pod, as anyone else can do by hitting subscribe so we land in your feeds automatically. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.